Hi guys, so this is just an explanation of this week's worksheets. So our first problem is dealing with prokaryotic transcription. So our first question asks us to box the first 5 nucleotides that are used as the template for transcription. So that's important for this question. And we don't need to know the exact position, but we should be pretty close. Okay, so to solve this problem, first we want to identify our -10 and our -35 sequence. So these underlined sequences on your worksheet, we see this one is TATGAT, which is pretty close to the TATA-AT. So that's our -10. And this sequence down here that is CTTACA is close to the TTGACA consensus -35. So you know that's our -35. And because this -35 is on this strand and the -10 is on this strand, we know that this bottom strand is the coding. And this top strand is the template. Okay, so then if we go about 10 base pairs up from the -10 region, I'm just gonna make like an approximate, an estimate, I guess. That would be about the first 5 nucleotides that would be serving as the template for transcription. Okay, so next question. If the TA base pair at 2 were changed to a GC, what would we expect the effect to be? Well, that's not really in an important, that's not in a place where sequence is important. Spacing is important. Spacing between the -35 and the -10 region is important, but the exact nucleotides that are in that region between the two are not important. So we'd expect to see no change. If the two GC base pairs at position 1 were changed to AT base pairs, what would we expect the effect on the amount of transcript produced to be? Well, so originally, let's write out what that sequence was. It was CTTACA, and now it's going to be TTTATA. And we know that the consensus is TTGACA. So let's look at how many nucleotides are different. So this is different from the consensus sequence, that's C there, and this T is different from the consensus sequence. So there are 2 nucleotides that are different from the consensus sequence. And then here, this T is different from the consensus sequence, and this T is different from the consensus sequence. So in both, in the before and the after, before we made the mutation, 2 nucleotides are different from the consensus sequence. So we would expect no change. Okay, what would the effect of a deletion of 7 nucleotides have between the -10 and the +1 start site? And this -10 is not affected. So we would expect no change in amount, but we would expect a decrease in length, because whatever is 10 nucleotides up from the -10 region is going to serve as the transcription start site. So if you delete some nucleotides here, basically what once was going to be the beginning of your mRNA transcript is now shifted to this -10, this region between the -10 and the start site that isn't going to be translated. So we've kind of shifted our mRNA such that part of what once was going to be transcribed isn't going to be transcribed anymore. So that transcript is going to be shorter. Okay, so what would the effect of a deletion of 7 nucleotides at 2 have on transcription? So this would, like I said before, the spacing between the -35 and the -10 is important. So if we delete 7 nucleotides at region 2, which is between the -10 and the -35, that's going to inhibit RNA's, or it's going to reduce RNA polymerase ability to touch down on that site. And anything that prevents RNA polymerase from touching down properly is going to decrease the amount of transcript that we can make, but it's not going to change the length of the transcript that you're able to make. Okay, so that's prokaryotic transcription. So definitions for these are going to be just posted on the key, but I realized there was like an error in the key that I posted where I wrote that allolactose binds to and represses lac-I, so lac-I can bind the operator, but it should have said binds to and represses lac-I, so lac-I can't bind the operator. So normally we have this nice little operator right here, and lac-I is going to be able to touch down and block transcription of the structural genes, lac-Z, Y, and A. But when lac-I is bound, or sorry, when allolactose is bound, it basically prevents lac-I from touching down on that operator. So allolactose is the repressor of the repressor. So allolactose would actually induce transcription of the lac Operon genes. Okay, and then cis elements are just non-mobile DNA elements. So that would be things like operators and like your -10 region, your -35 region, things that bind trans factors, basically. So they're non-mobile DNA elements that are going to bind the trans factors. And the trans elements are the mobile elements. So these are proteins, things like lac-I, or RNA polymerase, DNA polymerase, repressors, activators, proteins like that. So we know that lac-I acts in trans, and lac-O is this binding site that acts in cis. Okay, so now we're gonna work through this problem together. So we just want to fill in the remaining information here. So if we have a mutation, the mutant here, the first one is a lac-I deletion, and we know that lac-I acts in trans as it's telling us. So if we had just a chromosome with a lac-I deletion on it, then we would get constitutive expression of the structural genes. And I should probably start my transcription arrow here. Okay, so we get constitutive expression of the structural genes. Then if we add in a wild type plasmid, because lac-I acts in trans, that lac-I protein is going to be able to go and repress transcription on that other chromosome. So we would have an inducible phenotype. Okay, so this is problem 1. So mutant 2 is constitutive, and we know it's a cis mutation. So that means that it must be in the operator. We must have an OC, constitutive operator. And so if we add in a wild type copy, because this operator here on the wild type plasmid, an operator can't move because it's a cis element. So it's not going to be able to go over and repress that constitutive operator. It can't do anything about that. So we're still going to get constitutive expression from the chromosome. Okay, and then our last one, the mutant alone is uninducible, and with a wild type copy, it's also uninducible. So that means that the mutant is going to be a super repressor. So on our chromosome, we have an IS, And then, so a super repressor is going to be able to bind and like always block the operator. And the way that it does this actually is that it cannot bind allolactose. So it basically, if it can't bind its repressor, then it's going to always be active, always binding and blocking the constitutive operator. And if we add a wild type copy, the super repressor is going to outcompete that wild type. So even if this, even if you have like a wild type version that is inducible, it doesn't matter. That super repressor is going to just always be functioning and always binding the operator. So that's why it's always uninducible. And we know that LAC-IS is going to be able to act in trans. Okay, so for this one, you were supposed to kind of figure out what the phenotype would be just of the chromosome, and then what the phenotype would be when you have the plasmid and the chromosome. So for this first one, if you had a LAC-I deletion just from the chromosome, you would get constitutive expression of Z and Y. But if you have a wild type plasmid added, that LAC-I, and I'm gonna draw LAC-I as a heart, will be translated, and then it'll be able to go and bind both these operators. So we'll get inducible transcription of Z and Y. Okay, so then on our other variant where Z is broken and Y is broken, for the chromosome alone, we'll get constitutive expression of Z just like we did in our first example. But because Y is knocked out, Y will be uninducible. There is no Y coming from that chromosome because Y on that chromosome is deleted. So then when we have a plasmid inserted that has a Z deletion, the Z is going to be inducible because this wild type LAC-I will be produced, and it can go and repress the operator. So this Z is going to be inducible, and then it can repress this operator over here that does have a wild type Y copy. So the Y will be inducible as well, coming from the plasmid. Okay. So our next mutation here is a LAC-OC. So we have a constitutive operator. That means that if we're just looking at the chromosome alone, Y is going to be constitutive, or sorry, Z is going to be constitutive, and Y is also going to be constitutive. And then if we insert a wild type copy of the plasmid, it doesn't matter because that constitutive operator, remember, it's a cis mutation, so it can't be rescued. So we're just always getting constitutive expression of Z and Y coming from this chromosome right here. So Z and Y are still going to be constitutive. Okay, next we're going to look at this problem here. So just looking at the chromosome, which has a Y minus mutation, the chromosome is going to give us constitutive expression of Z, but uninducible expression of Y because Y is deleted. But then when we're looking at the plasmid and the chromosome, again, we're going to get constitutive expression of Z from the chromosome, and then LAC-Y is going to be inducible because you have a wild type copy on the plasmid. Okay, so lastly for our LAC-I super repressor mutation, LAC-Z is going to be uninducible and LAC-Y is going to be uninducible on the chromosome. And then because that super repressor is always blocking the operator. And then when we have the plasmid introduced, remember that this LAC-I super repressor is outcompeting the normal LAC-I, so it's always binding to these operators and giving us that uninducible phenotype. And then in this second problem, it doesn't really matter that these things are broken. LAC-IS is always binding, always blocking transcription of the structural genes. So it's going to be uninducible. Okay, hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Email me if you have any questions, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and yeah, start getting ready for that final.